Hi guys, and welcome to this video for Year 12 Business Management. We are on Unit 3, Outcome 3, which is all about operations management. We're doing our third key knowledge point in this video, and in this video we're going to think about the characteristics of operations management, turning inputs into outputs, and be thinking about the differences in manufacturing and service businesses. If we look at the specific key knowledge point in our study design, we're going to need to know the characteristics, and that is going to be an important word in questions, particularly for exams, between the characteristics of the operations management system within both manufacturing and service businesses. So our goal in this video is to understand what a manufacturer and a service business are, and then we're going to look at the key characteristic differences in how they turn inputs into outputs. Let's recall what we mean by an element of an operation system and what we mean by operations management and operation systems. If you recall from previous lessons or previous videos, operation systems have three key elements. We have inputs, which are the resources, including labor, capital, knowledge, time, money, and the raw materials used to produce a good or service. We then have processes, because businesses will conduct transformational activities to convert these inputs into a finished goods or service. And then we have the output, which is the end result, the finished goods or service. So simplistically, and you can see in this example, we are making a house. Inputs include labor and then all the raw materials like wood, steel, bricks. But then there is going to be all these transformational activities, the actual building of the house, to create the end output. Now, it's important to understand that these elements and just how that works will differ very significantly whether we are talking about a manufacturing or a service business. That's because they have very different business models, very different outputs, and hence the entire operation system will be very different. And you might have heard of these terms manufacturer and service and have an idea of what they are and maybe examples and why they differ, but we're going to bring some key formal terminology around that. So when we are talking about a manufacturing business, we are talking about any business that combines raw materials and other resources to produce a finished good that is tangible. And you can see that's a very important word in my definition. When we are talking about a tangible good, we are saying that this good can be seen, it can be touched, and it can be stored for later use. So it is a physical thing that has been created, like a house. I like to think of it as something that you can touch. Maybe even you can walk out the store with it in a bag. Now, a service business is very different. This is any business that uses resources, could still be equipment, labor, knowledge, and expertise, but they are going to perform an activity. They're not creating a finished good. They're going to perform an activity that satisfies a need for a customer. And this need and activity is intangible. That means the service cannot be seen, it can't be touched, it can't be stored for later use, and you can't walk out of a store with it in a bag. This activity might be advice or something along those lines, has met a need, and then it is completed, so it can't be stored. They are our examples, and I want us to use that terminology when we do definitions and when we respond to questions. And I do encourage you to have a think about this activity around which of these products are going to be good manufacturers or service businesses. Now we're going to move into the actual characteristics, what makes them different. And if you see a question in an exam, they should use this word characteristics when they're asking of it. This part of their study design is often going to ask you to explain the characteristic differences between service and manufacturing businesses. And the first one, as we mentioned, is that they are going to differ in whether the product is tangible or intangible. As we discussed, manufacturing businesses are going to produce tangible outputs. Remember, outputs is one part of the operation system. This means the goods can be seen and touched and stored for later use. We will come to some quality in later videos. That means the quality might be easier to measure because you can see it and touch it and even inspect it. Now, service businesses are going to produce intangible outputs. This means that the final service cannot be physically seen, it can't be touched, it can't be stored for later use, and the quality might be more difficult to measure because what might be a good product for service for one might be a different for another. For example, a haircut. Someone might love their haircut and someone might get the exact same haircut and it might be different. It's going to be whether the need has been met. Other characteristic differences are whether the business is going to be capital intensive or labor intensive. Now, when I talk about labor, I'm also, of course, talking about people. And capital, I'm talking about equipment. So essentially, we're saying one of these types of businesses is going to rely more on people to get something done. And the other type of business is going to rely more on equipment to get something done. And of course, this something we're referring to is the processes. Now, manufacturing businesses are going to rely more heavily on the use of equipment and machinery as key inputs in the operation system, and they're going to be very involved in the processes. So, key inputs, we're going to need to have lots of equipment and machinery to start the process. And the equipment and machinery is going to be a key part of the process. Now, this is because machines are more suited to the mass production of standardized goods that manufacturing businesses do. Manufacturers create lots of products that are generally the same. And machines are really good at simple and repetitive tasks. And in fact, they can do them with more efficiency and precision than humans. But services business, which are going to try and meet a need of a human, which is going to differ in each individual case, are going to rely more on labor. Humans are going to be the key input and the key component of the process. This is because humans are more suited to carrying out services which are customized and tailored, and they can meet the needs of the customer. Services may require more technical skills and expertise and knowledge of customer needs, which machines struggle to cope with. And then we come to our next key difference or key characteristic difference, and that is the level of customer contact. Manufacturing businesses typically produce goods which are consumed after the final good is produced. This means the processes are highly automated and there's no real customer contact or involvement. You might remember from previous videos I've used chocolate as an example. You don't really have customers walking through the factory giving advice in the process. Yes, they do buy the good and interact then, but they're not involved in the actual processes. However, service businesses typically provide services that are consumed simultaneously as they are produced, like a haircut or dining out in a restaurant. It is produced and consumed at the same time. The customer hence must be present for the service for it to be carried out. And hence there is a much higher degree of customer contact in a service delivery. Our next key difference, key characteristic difference, is the level of storage or consumption. Can the good be stored for later consumption? Now, manufacturing businesses typically produce goods that are consumed after the good is produced, and hence they have a longer shelf life that can be stored away for later use and are consumed at a later date, often when the customer decides to. These are often goods that have best before dates, and as we have used as chocolate as an example, you buy it and then you can store it often for months before consuming it. Whereas a service business, which is, as we've talked about a few times, is consumed simultaneously, does not have that ability to be stored. The service has no shelf life and cannot be stored away for later use, if you go to a restaurant, if you go to a cinema, if you get a haircut, this happens straight away. Now, in terms of another key difference is that manufacturers are more likely to produce goods that are standardized, so the same, whereas services are likely to be more customized. Manufacturing businesses, as we have mentioned, produce standardized goods, which are mass-produced on a large scale by machines. This means that the final output is identical and the customer has very limited abilities to have customization. And even if they pretend that there is some customization, like you can pick some features in a car, you don't have overall control. You might be given a menu of things that you can tweak. Whereas a service business typically has the ability to customize the final service to meet the needs of the consumer. The customer gets to tell how they want their haircut done, how their financial advice needs to be done. They get to speak to the accountant and say how the accountant can help, or the legal advice a lawyer will provide. It's altered and customized to each individual customer. And here we have some examples of how a manufacturer would do this, and again, how a service business would do it. Remembering for each, we are still ultimately having the same process where inputs are going to go through some sort of transformation where the process occurs, and then we will have a final output. But the actual characteristics of how that occurs is going to differ very much between a manufacturer and a service business. And that's it. I hope that this has allowed you to have a really good understanding of what we mean by a manufacturing and service business. I hope you have got some good ideas of examples for each, and importantly, how these two types of businesses really differ in their characteristics of how they turn inputs into outputs.